Hello Internet. I'm going to try and make this lesson on documentation and citation in the MLA style quick. However, the takeaway I want you to have before we begin is that you don't have to have this memorized. This is just something that you have to do as a part of most of your research and academic papers. And so always be able to reference this stuff. Better yet, do it and know enough to do it while you're working on the drafts, so it's not something you have to go through and look at your whole paper in the end. There's lots of good resources. I might only recommend against using websites that would claim to do this for you. Most of those scripts are bogged down with advertisements, and a lot of the implementation of word processors require you to input it and format it correctly still, and so that eliminates their utility in my mind. However, if it looks good and works out well for you, keep doing it. Primarily MLA will be used in literature, English language classes. If you need to know when it was founded, it's actually not that old style. Just a few key points. Your titles of your bigger things, these are often called containers, are italicized. So these are your books, movies, plays, collections of various things, magazines or whatever. And the titles of the little things, your articles, poems, short stories, the specific smaller components of larger containers, should be put in quotation marks. In-text citation is important because if your reader finds information in your paper that is unclear or vague where it came from or how it was gathered, they can assume that you are stating its accuracy or veracity. And if you're a college student who then has not clearly done any of this research himself, that is, do the actual study or whatever, you got it from somewhere. Me, I'm not going to go automatically accusing, but this is certainly a clear sign of plagiarism if it happens. It's just obvious when you're using something too specific and to say you heard it and that you know it off the top of your head. Or you either made it up and then it should rightfully be ignored, and you should read information that's presented to you with some suspicion. In-text citation lets you say, here it is and here's where I got it. And it also helps the reader work their way through it like that. They can find the author responsible, consider that source, and then go further to look to the actual wording if they want to test the accuracy. It's a strong rhetorical stance to say, don't believe me, go look for yourself. This is used with the works cited page then to both find the specific quote or whatever, as well as the source. You don't merely want to put in your sources willy-nilly. There's two ways to go about things. When you need to use the exact wording, exact figures or phrases, and you don't go on this way for too long, although there are rules for block quoting, we won't talk about them right now, you will be quoting. You want to be sure to not cherry pick. That is, it's a joke from a movie, kind of funny. It's all delivery, so I won't go too much into it, but you can reverse the meaning of a statement by adding not to the beginning. And so read very carefully and then don't just quote or modify the meaning that the original source is trying to make by cutting off parts. You can also paraphrase, which is another word for summarizing the information. And so if you're pulling a bigger chunk of information or a whole story that you don't need to worry about the exact wording, this is where it's appropriate. Again, you'll still want to be accurate, and you don't want to paraphrase something too long, especially, or too short, because if you're getting to exact wording, exact facts or figures, maybe you're better off quoting. This is in your essays what your instructor is testing to see if you can effectively integrate sources as well. So you'll want to also be sure to talk about that information. That's an important part of argumentative as well as research writing. You don't just throw in a bunch of quotes, which obviously won't look like your own essay, and you won't want to paraphrase a bunch too. So I'm going to talk very briefly, and I've included some ideas here and in the next slide to tell you how to cite, but again, look this stuff up yourself. the newer versions of the texts have the new rules, and the new rules kind of streamline a lot of stuff. But again, go back to the idea with what in-text citation is doing. It's telling your reader who's responsible for those information that you're borrowing from. You're giving them credit so you avoid plagiarism, and it's in some cases helping them literally find where you're getting that quote from. So usually it's the author's name and the page number to address this stuff in print sources, and the author's name can be in the sentence itself or in parentheses at the end of the sentence outside of the quotation marks before the period. I also include various documents and internet sources that have page numbers included in them if it's not just one long web source that you would scroll down to, but it's something you have to click through or work through the pages. Include the page number in your citation. For web sources, usually though, you'll only be putting the author's name, organizational name, or whatever in the sentence or in the parentheses. If you are citing an entire article, you summarized one pretty lengthily, you would then put the name and title of whatever it is. You might also be considerate of, like, sometimes you're citing something from a news wire service like the AP, Getty, whatever, Reuters, and so they will not have an author, and when they're there, however, you would use that. I'm subscribing to Keeping It Simple Smarty Pants here. There are things that can get mixed up with your citation. If you have multiple authors, we'll just add all of them. If you have 3 or more, you can also list the first author's name in the parentheses and then add et al. Period in the citation. If you're doing the listing of authors in the sentence, you can write all their names, or you can do some generalization, Poe and his fellow classic writers or fellow researchers. Pick one way and stick to it. So if you only use et al., go with et al. If you only list all their authors' names, do it that way. If there's multiple sources by the same author, be real careful, because is that one point of view? Probably is, and you're trying to use multiple sources not to report on what one person says, but what's out there. However, it might be worthwhile to use something where you look at someone's early views and then how they've changed later on in life. But when you cite something by the same author, you use the author's name with a comma and a brief title of the source, or a brief bit of the title. You don't have to say the whole thing, but a few words, just to distinguish between which sources there are. Again, if there's no author, sometimes there's a government organization or a group or a corporate author that you would give credit to in these cases. If your source quoted someone else, well, you would cite it by doing QTD, quoted in, and then the regular citation. And be sure to mention the person's name and what they were saying. One last point before we get to works cited page, but we're talking about in-text citation. Sometimes it's good to talk about one source and then move to talking about another source. Sometimes, though, you'll be illustrating a compare and contrast sort of deal between multiple points of views or sources. Really, for the paper itself, it's your call. What would be the best idea for what you're doing? Sometimes it's good to talk about a subject and its components piece by piece. Sometimes you're looking at what people are saying individually. Sometimes you're illustrating the back and forth. When you do in-text citation, you mention the author's name the first time, and after that you can avoid doing it, only putting in the page number if you have that, until you bring up another source, in which case then you mention the new author's name. And if you go back to the previous author, that's what you then mention the name again. It can get confusing to jump around just describing it, so be very careful in particular when you're having your reader read through this thing. Anywho, now onto the works cited page. The works cited page, here's some details and how it looks. Again, the whole thing does not count towards your page number there at the end. I've asked if I could allow it. I would, but I can't. It's alphabetical order, double spaced. Now you set the format to hanging. You'll see in the sample later on what that looks like. But basically, they're all variations of a theme on the book's works cited page, listing the author, last name, comma, first, title, publisher, and date. With a web article, though, we mix it up a little bit. We put between the title of the website and the author's name, the title of the article itself. We have to add in the date of that information, URL, and then the date you accessed it. Again, a book or web article will be pretty standard, so that's what I think you'll be sticking with. Although if you're doing it as a work in an anthology or an article from a magazine, they're kind of combinations of both the web or the book thing. And it's easier to just show you, look at examples of the proper citation and just replace the information with that which you can find. So I've tried to simulate a page of what your works cited might look like. Again, you have your header at the top, you have a new title indicating the works cited has begin, and you list your information according to the directions. This is what the hanging looks like. Again, there's no extra space besides the double spacing between the sources. You just set it to hanging, and so the first line goes all the way to the end of the margin, and every line afterwards is tabbed in. Now, obviously you can do this manually, but I would recommend just setting it up so that, in your paragraph style to hanging for this part and this part only.